third and final big name that I would like to mention in this documentary is Leonard White. Upon his joining of the company of ABC, one of his first assignments was to take reins as producer of a show entitled Inside Story, and in turn worked on the last 9 episodes of its 13 installment run. After this, Leonard was tasked with creating a 13-episode run of Armchair theatre to occupy a summer span in 1960. However, due to Sidney Newman being quite protective of this show and the aim of attracting a different audience, the result of this was the spin-off Armchair Mystery Theatre that focused on crime and mystery stories. It seems like the ABC were planning for a second run of this spin-off to be broadcasted in 1962. However, due to the producer of it, Leonard White, being busy with producing the first series of The Avengers, which was being done in a very tight schedule, and with it being screened through the entirety of 1961, it seems like this intent was muddied somewhat. In turn, Irene Shubik was able to sneak in and propose a science fiction spin-off of Armchair Theatre to fill in this gap of uncertainty. When it was decided to make this spin-off, a production block of 14 sci-fi episodes under the title Out of This World were shown in 1962. Upon a decision by Sidney Newman, one of these was torn off and shown as an episode of Armchair Theatre, followed by a trailer for the new show. The main series of now 13 episodes began with an adaptation of Rog Phillips's The Yellow Pill, then an adaptation of Little Lost Robot by Isaac Asimov, Cold Equations by Tom Godwin, and Impostor by Philip K. Dick were screened next. If Murder Club could be seen as the pilot to Out of This World, then what would be the prologue episode was the rehomed Armchair Theatre Dumb Martian. The original author of this story was John Whyndham, a name viewers educated with the sci-fi genre most likely have heard of. In front of me I have an SF Masterworks hardback of his most famous novel, The Day of the Triffids. What's also considered or in the running as his most known work is The Midwich Cuckoos, which got adapted as the iconic 1960 film Village of the Damned. Either side of my copy of Triffids are 2 short story collections released by Penguin Publishing. Whereas John was not the most prolific in terms of having works transcribed within the overall timeline of Out of the Unknown, he is one of the most important. Consider Her Ways and Others holds the story Random Quest, which made for an adaptation in the 3rd series of the show. At this point, I am uncertain as to what a top 10 most popular episodes of the show list would look like, but this would easily be in the top 5. People on the internet, from what I have seen, greatly mourn the loss of this one from the archives and say that the script is incredible. The very next adaptation of the story, A Quest for Love, owed a lot to this teleplay, and another version from the mid-2000s pays tribute to the screenwriter of it. As well as this was the producer's favourite episode of Series 3. The Seeds of Time not only contains Dumb Martian, but also holds Time to Rest, which was amalgamated with a novelette called No Place Like Earth to form the premiere episode of Series 1. With Whyndham being the author credited to the intended first episode of Out of This World, then the first episode of Out of the Unknown, and then one of the most popular episodes of the entire show on top of that, I think it's only right to cite this as an important figure in the history of what I am talking about here. A husband brings aboard a space station their Martian partner and receives more than they could have prepared for in Dumb Martian. Unfortunately, not much is left of this ABC sci-fi series. Armchair Theatre Murder Club and Dumb Martian, along with 12 of the episodes from Out of This World, are missing, leaving just Little Lost Robot viewable today. The BFI ended up releasing the episode as its own DVD volume concurrently with their Out of the Unknown set. It contains 2 restorations of the episode, an audio commentary, and audio-only recordings from 2 otherwise completely lost episodes, along with a PDF document being the script for Dumb Martian and a booklet. The audio-only episodes are Cold Equations and Impostor, with the latter being incomplete. When gathering material to compose the 3rd series of Out of the Unknown, Irene Shubik ended up reusing the script of that The Yellow Pill broadcast, with this new production being shown as the 12th in this series. Broadcasted on the 25th of March 1969, an audio recording of this rendering of the script is preserved, leading for it to be one of the reconstructed episodes on the BFI's box set. The script for Clive Exton's 1962 adaptation of Target Generation, originally by Clifford D. Simic, and episode 12 of Out of This World, was also reused for the same purpose. However, only a handful of small audio fragments exist from this second broadcasting. There are 5 such audio clips known to survive from this transmission. As far as I'm aware, the script for the former remained unchanged when being reused, but the one for the other was restructured. Producer Roger Parks told Clive Exton, the original scriptwriter, that he wanted cuts in the dialogue to fit the 50 minutes format of this newer version, as according to Mark Ward's book. This could mean that the Out of This World production was slightly longer. It's also documented in Ward's volume that Parks thought the 1962 production was very gripping. A psychiatrist has before them a possible murderer. They have never met, but the patient knows a lot about the other's private life. The subject also claims to be a time traveller. Will a special medical tablet bring out the truth? There is another interesting and relevant thing that connects this show to Out of the Unknown that I would like to mention here. It is noted in Mark Ward's book that the Series 2 episode Level 7 was originally considered for Out of This World also. Since that is an existing episode, this detail makes for a really cool fact. A faulty servant robot is told to get lost and hides among its own kind within a space station. A race against time begins to find it, ultimately to resolve a crisis created subsequently. Little Lost Robot is an interesting one to have from this series to be preserved, as it's possible that if all 14 productions were in existence, this would be one of the least favourites through an overall assessment by somebody, going by what I know of the other episodes. However, despite this, it is a very significant one to have in the archives, as within the timeline of Out of This World and the first 3 series of Out of the Unknown, there would be 8 adaptations of Isaac Asimov, with this being the first. Following the to-be-discussed story parade The Caves of Steel, the remaining 6 were The Dead Past, Suckerbait, Satisfaction Guaranteed, The Prophet adapted from his story Reason, Liar, and The Naked Sun. Isaac is known primarily for his robot science fiction stories, and all of these mentioned are adaptations of them, with the exception of both of the Series 1 episodes. I think it'd be fair to say that the pickings of adaptations here within the greater chronology of Asimov's robot stories is somewhat random. Granted, the entirety of his fiction canon hadn't been published by the mid-60s, but still. In turn, because of this, some recurring characters from them are ones that appear more than once within the timeline of Out of the Unknown. Dr. Susan Calvin appeared in Little Lost Robot, The Prophet and Liar. Going in order, she was first played by Maxine Audley, then Beatrix Lamont, and then Wendy Gifford. They also appeared in the original printed version of Satisfaction Guaranteed, but was omitted from this adaptation and had a new Doctor character instead, I believe. The Naked Sun was a direct sequel to The Caves of Steel. In turn, the characters of Elijah Bailey and the robot Daniel appeared in both teleplays. First, the duo was played by Peter Cushing and John Carson, then they were played by Paul Maxwell and David Collings. A detail given about the sequel story in Mark Ward's book causes a loop back to happen in this video, because the director Rudolph Cartier originally wanted Ian Hendry to act as Elijah, but they were due to start filming the movie Doppelganger, otherwise known as Journey to the Far Side of the Sun, in Portugal at the time. As well as this, Rudolph so happened to direct David in the previously mentioned Level 7 episode. Out of This World Episode 4, Impostor, was dramatised by Terry Nation, who would end up contributing 3 scripts to the show, which led to them tying with Clive Exton, in who produced the most of these for the show. The next of the ones by Terry was Episode 5, Botany Bay, which was one of 2 original stories produced for the run. At the time, the transmission received praise, and 1 week later, Kinematograph Weekly described the series as the most intelligent and best written of the genre since Quatermass. Cold Equations followed a pilot of a spaceship trying to overcome the dilemma of a stowaway, while Impostor had its main character being accused of actually being an enemy robot in disguise, with them trying to prove their innocence. The figure of Bill Sheridan ended up being confined to an institution where he works at, after killing an orderly possessed by an alien who are trying to invade the workplace in Nation's original story, Botany Bay. This was reportedly a pretty horrific episode. One reviewer said that the Philip K. Dick adaptation showed promise, but was let down by obvious budget and production limitations. An unfortunate one to have missing, as this was the very first TV or film adaptation of the author apparently. However, there is a soundtrack recording as I mentioned, but subsequently it has about 8 minutes absent from it, unfortunately. Going around on the internet are surviving promotional pieces of material featuring Karloff, likely on the cover of a magazine. I can place this image as being from the Impostor episode, as within an article I have used for information that will be cited, they have included an image from further on in the episode that displays the same city prop that you can see Boris with here. There is a much bigger and more interesting piece of information on existing photographs from the show, but I'll detail that in a bit. However, for now, here's a colorization of the host in a picture I found on IMDb. A curious find, as Mark Ward's book also uses this image in monochrome, but the crop to it there is much taller and skinnier, whereas this one is much shorter and wider. It could also be possible that this was a color photograph originally. The principal motivation for the series was to chill the blood, as cited by a reviewer in The Times, praising 4 of the first 6 broadcasts. This excluded The Yellow Pill and Impostor. Episode 6 was an adaptation of Robert Moore Williams's Medicine Show, and Episode 7 was a dramatisation of Catherine MacLean's Pictures Don't Lie. Irene Shubik cited 2 episodes from the show as her personal favourites, with one of these being the latter here. She was reportedly humoured by the response to Medicine Show. In this installment, 2 foolish people cause chaos when arriving in an American town with a sophisticated medical machine. Episode 7 featured a radio researcher trying to determine what a race of aliens will look like after establishing contact with their spaceship. Leonard White was reminded of Pictures Don't Lie some 30 years later, by the owner of a local garage he frequented, who expressed their desire to get a video of it. This is a memory documented in the chapter on the show within White's book Armchair Theatre: The Lost Years. A struggling performer has an increase in popularity after utilizing a contraption owned by a master magician. Questions arise when there begins an increase of disappearing people, however. Episode 8, Vanishing Act, was the second of the duo of original stories, this one by Richard Waring. Number 9 was The Why Did We Fall, originally by Raymond F. Jones, followed by The Dark Star, an adaptation of the novel Ape of London by Frank Crisp. The former featured an investigator that is distrustful of his orders, whom is enlisted to detect synthetic creatures, while Dark Star featured the police allying with a biologist to combat an alien plague that is choking London. Immigrant made for installment 11 and Terry Nation's third script. This was a Clifford D. Simic story, as was entry 12, Target Generation, which made for Clive Exton's third script. The Tycoons, originally by Arthur Sellings, ended the run on a lighter note with a teleplay by Bruce Stewart. The opener of this series-ending trilogy featured an Earth spy trying to find an answer as to why nobody returns from a bountiful mineral planet, while Target Generation features an intellectual trying to solve an approaching force simply known as the Tremor. The series finished with a company responsible for creating novelty mannequins that aroused suspicion from not paying their taxes properly, only for an accountant to find something not human after investigating. Out of This World was an enormous success for the time, receiving much praise. It's generally unknown what the show's ratings were like, but The Yellow Pill was watched by approximately 11 million people, with the early episodes falling down to around 8 or 9 million at an estimate. An article I used for this is simply called Out of This World, on a site titled British Television Drama, with the author being Oliver Wake. Interestingly, he is able to culminate a general reception to the show and mentions that they were able to view telesnaps taken of every episode of the show. Thanks to this, they in turn assessed that the show offered little in the way of fantastical costumes or sets, and states that Little Lost Robot was perhaps the most extravagant in this regard. The telesnaps in question have not surfaced online. To answer how they survived and why they were produced in the first place, Leonard White kept a scrapbook of the show which included them. To give you viewers an idea as to what this would look like, this is the 2009 DVD box set of the second series and the surviving episodes from the first of the Avengers. During production of this box set, which predates the Tunnel of Fear being rediscovered, Leonard presented a scrapbook he made for the first series. With his permission, it was replicated and formed part of a DVD booklet that also has an episode guide to the first series. It's basically a massive kind of reprinted collection of newspaper cutouts, Radio Times cutouts, TV magazine cutouts, various bits and pieces you would have seen promoting the series at the time, and it also comes with telesnaps and what have you of several of the missing episodes of the show. It is very, very extensive, as you can see, and it is quite beautiful. And I believe when the telesnaps come into play, it goes through the episodes in order. I believe only about half, the second half of the series here in question was telesnapped. It is overall easy to see how important of a template Out of This World was and or is for Out of the Unknown, with it primarily being adaptations of sci-fi stories, having a couple new ones, and some lighter moments such as the 1965 finale, The Midas Plague, and the Tycoons here. It is thought that a second series of this ABC creation would occur, but this didn't happen, likely due to both Irene Shubik and Sydney Newman moving to the BBC. The idea was not dead, however. In early 1964, the television channel BBC Two was launched with the intention of showing more ambitious programming and less mainstream when compared to BBC One. Obviously, the company needed a way for it to get going, and the resulting Story Parade was the first series of drama to be broadcasted on it, a series that would showcase adaptations of modern-day novels. Irene was appointed story editor, as she was for Out of This World, for this new series, and came across a very similar problem she would later have with Out of the Unknown, which was in discovering and finding suitable material for adaptation in the template of 75-minute episodes, of which there would be 24 total. However, a somewhat subsequential flip side to this also occurred by error. The first production of the new show, entitled Condemned to Acquittal, had to be erased immediately after broadcast, which is because the copyright agent Irene used was mistaken, in that an adaptation of the source material was promised to a film company and not the BBC. This was overall another example of drama anthologies like Armchair Theatre that Shubik would work on, and likely the last one before joining another as co-producer later on in the 1960s. It would seem that the majority of her mid-60s career on TV would be work on sci-fi, namely producing the first two series of Out of the Unknown and the commissioning and collecting of scripts for the third. As mentioned in the first video on this channel, she accepted the opportunity to act as co-producer on the Wednesday play, which would eventually lead to her overseeing the metamorphosis of this show into Play for Today in 1970, with her leaving the Out of the Unknown team leading to the fourth and its new style. With a first edition appearing in 1975, she was the author of Play for Today, The Evolution of Television Drama. It was an autobiographical account of the rise in British television of the single play, and also its development, which is a term associated with the likes of Armchair Theatre and Play for Today. A second edition of the book was released 25 years later, and was expanded and updated to include new television works since the first iteration, namely Rumpole of the Bailey and Jewel in the Crown. I ended up buying a copy of the second edition for my collection and potential academic purposes for my videos in July 2024, with the copy arriving at the start of the next month. Whenever I got my copy, I was completely and utterly astonished to find an inscription by Irene herself inside, which reads, "To Michael, with very happy memories of BBC days, a parenthesis, when it was the BBC worthy of the name. Love, Irene, March 2001. I can only theorise on the meaning and purpose of this inscription, as the copy was bought online with no mention of it being signed or any details about this, but I do feel that I have a good and likely one. Sydney Newman divided the BBC's drama department into separate series, serials and play divisions in 1963. After this point, an individual by the name of Michael Bakewell became head of plays and or drama at the BBC. With the company being mentioned twice in the inscription and Bakewell living to 2023, I think it is possible that this particular copy was inscribed and gifted to him by Irene in 2001. Whoever was dealing with his belongings after their passing didn't realise what they were handling in terms of this book, where it then ended up on Amazon and them ultimately selling it to me for just under £8. There is a wealth of information within this book, and probably many more documentary-like videos could be made out of it, but it is the fourth chapter that I would like to explore here. Story Parade began transmission just 3 days after the start of broadcasts on BBC Two, with Condemned to Acquittal being shown on the 24th of April 1964. Irene's account in regards to this episode from the book describes the positive reception to the story as a thing of irony for her, because of how their agent slipped up with the selling of the rights. More specifically, it was reportedly about to be made into a German film, and an agreement had to be made to wipe the BBC version right after broadcast. The book describes a part of the process of adaptation by detailing that many of the available for adaptation novels were far too broad in regards to characters and locations, contextualized by the physical and financial reasons that possessed the production team. It is also cited that the series was likely dropped in 1965 because of this ambitious nature. The Bachelors by Muriel Spark, The Unknown Citizen from Tony Parker, and The Old Boys by William Trevor are episodes noted as being favourites from the series or ones remembered by Irene. The chapter in question here also goes over Shubik's general feelings on the genre of science fiction and showcases and displays a clear knowledge and passion of it. Memories and details of Pictures Don't Lie, Target Generation and Medicine show from Out of This World, along with her American-based quests to find sci-fi authors, are also written down. At around early to mid 1966, at a guess, she would end up buying more stories from Isaac Asimov for adaptation, and during this mentioning of this particular event, the book states that he was one of the most amusing and interesting men that Irene had ever met. I place this event at approximately the first half of 1966, as the book mentioned it using the word "meanwhile" right after documentation about a desire for Shubik to be assistant producer on a 13-episode Georges Simeon series to follow up their recent series adaptation of this author's character Maygrete. This particular chaser show would ultimately be 13 Against Fate, which Irene works on concurrently to the second run of Out of the Unknown. I not only mentioned this meeting with Isaac to add more to the overview of his BBC adaptations that this video partially is, but to lead into the fact that the 7th broadcast of Story Parade was an adaptation of his novel The Caves of Steel, which would in turn be the most remembered and probably acclaimed of all of the broadcasts from this particular series. Shubik agreed to working on Story Parade from persuasion by Sydney Newman, but by the point of the success of Out of This World, and at her stage in their career timeline with both ABC and the BBC, she had become disenchanted with the contemporary set worlds of armchair theatre and was much more interested in producing science fiction, wherein she saw massive potential with regards to intellectualism. The adaptation of The Caves of Steel proved to be a result of this. The teleplay was handled by the experienced writer of Out of This World, Terry Nation. Their only writing credit that is affiliated with Out of the Unknown directly was being the adapter of Ray Bradbury's The Fox and the Forest in Series 1, although the story here was one earmarked for use in Story Parade. As people may know, his Doctor Who creation The Daleks appeared in the Series 3 closer Get Off My Cloud. I imagine he received a created by mention in the end credits here. The medium transcription by Terry Nation remained extremely faithful to the novel, with the characterization remaining very equal for the most part. It is to do with this aspect of the story, however, that there were some changes naturally. The conclusion to Commissioner Enderby was the most dramatic of all, and the character of Dr. Gerrigal got gender swapped. Director Peter Sadesty later reused a blaster prop in Out of the Unknown time in advance. Here it can be seen in the opening part of the play during the murder scene. Subsequently, this is a fragment that still exists. The victim in this opening scene was played by John Carson, uncredited, who would later on play the robot Daniel here, as the automaton was modelled after the victim. Carson's supporting character would join Peter Cushing, whom acted as the lead figure, Elijah Bailey. An extensive and lengthy chase scene where Bailey and Daniel are pursued by Closar and his compatriots was among what was created during pre-filming. Jack Kine and Bernard Wilkie helped with the model work, which included some kind of travel machine and the shot of the city dome, the latter of which opened up the episode with a voiceover by Cushing. The end credits were similar to Out of the Unknown, with images of the lead characters being shown with text elements of the sequence. Rehearsals took place over 3 days, with the recording being done on the last of these, the 7th of May 1964. Broadcast took place on the 5th of June. This Peter Cushing fronted adaptation of Asimov's novel was extremely well received, leading to a repeat showing on the 28th of August. The episode apparently had some form of gravitas because of the lead actor, which led to a lot of people enjoying it because of him from what I have read. The Caves of Steel proves again that science fiction can be exciting, carry a message, and be intellectually stimulating. This is a piece of praise the Daily Telegraph gave the teleplay. Another critic was also impressed, saying that it was a fascinating mixture of science fiction and whodunit, which worked remarkably well. One would guess, judging from the sets, costumes, and miscellaneous gadgetry, that this was one of the series' most expensive productions, but if so, it was worth every penny. The second reviewer here said it was the best of the whole series. The complete 75-minute production is unfortunately lost from the archives. A handful of clips from documentaries and a visual effects showreel have been uncovered, amounting to approximately 2 minutes of footage. Some of the dialogue by characters in this has been talked over because of the nature of what they were used in, however. I will be repeating the following in one of my next videos, but I feel that it is important to state what I'm about to say here. In 2020, a collection of production stills was recovered. Then, in January of 2023, I spotted an eBay listing selling prints of pictures from the production. I understood at the time that the find from a couple years ago had already happened, but some of what I saw in the listing I had not seen before, so I ended up saving the auction pictures for preservation. Unfortunately, I could only save them in poor quality fashion, but about half to 2/3 of the 17 I saved I have not seen online since, so it's possible that you viewers may have not seen some of the pictures I am currently displaying before. Despite Shubik herself reportedly denying that it acted as a pilot, Story Parade The Caves of Steel acted as how Armchair Theatre Murder Club had done, and was the most immediate precursor to Out of the Unknown. In the summer of 1964, Irene suggested a BBC version of Out of This World, as it is put in Mark Ward's book. Sidney Newman agreed, and later on that year, he and head of plays on television, Michael Bakewell, commissioned her to become story editor on this new series. Thus, the intricate and at times complex gestational period of Out of the Unknown had ended. But, as the series was lightened by Green, more issues and complexities would surface and challenge both Shubik and others.